Senator Ted Cruz walked onto the set expecting tough questions, but what he got was something else. The host hadn't invited him to challenge ideas. They came to ambush him. What none of them expected was the audience, slowly, unmistakably, taking his side. Within minutes, the room's energy changed. By the end, one voice stood tall, and it wasn't theirs. Stay tuned. Because this moment didn't just bend the rules of live political television. It shattered them. They didn't think he'd show. When the doors opened and Senator Cruz stepped onto the studio floor, you could feel it, like the pressure in the air before a thunderstorm. The hosts straightened their posture. Elizabeth Warren, expression unreadable, leaned forward. Joy Behar whispered something to Sunny Hostin, who simply nodded, her gaze locked on Cruz, like a trial lawyer sizing up a witness. Everyone watching knew this wouldn't be a polite discussion. The producers wanted fireworks, and the hosts were prepared to strike matches, but when Cruz sat down, there was no bravado, no grin, no smirk, just calm. He looked across the table as if he were entering a Senate hearing, not a daytime talk show. The first few minutes were civil, scripted, cautious, mentions of his past legal work, his role on the Senate Judiciary Committee, his involvement in high-profile Supreme Court hearings. But behind the tight smiles was an electric tension. And then, just a few minutes in, Warren made the first move. "Senator Cruz," she began, tone sharp but polished, "you've been vocal about media accountability. Some say that what you're proposing borders on censorship. Where do you draw the line between protecting free speech and controlling it?" The crowd quieted, cameras pushed in. Cruz didn't blink. "I support the First Amendment with every fiber of my being," he said evenly. "But freedom isn't a license for falsehood. With influence comes responsibility, especially for those who shape public opinion every day." A flicker passed across Bihar's face. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, ready. "But who decides what's false?" she pressed. "You've championed claims that many say turned out to be less than accurate." Now the gloves were off. But Cruz didn't rush. He glanced at Hostin, then turned to the crowd. "That why," he said, "is the exact conversation we need. Not slogans, not sound bites, just real, uncomfortable, grown-up dialogue like this." A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Something shifted. The host had expected pushback, maybe some evasion, but they weren't prepared for someone this composed. That's when Joy came in hard. "You've defended figures who've attacked the press," she said. "How can you claim to value journalism when you align yourself with people trying to dismantle it?" Cruz gave a slight nod. "You're absolutely right to ask," he replied. "I respect journalism. I don't respect propaganda disguised as journalism. The American people deserve the truth, even when that truth challenges the preferred narrative." Another murmur from the crowd, louder this time. But this wasn't the moment that would shake the room. Not yet. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't just silence the table, it would expose something far bigger than any of them anticipated. Because Cruz wasn't just defending his record, he was about to challenge theirs. "So, Senator Cruz," Warren asked, her voice edged with skepticism, "are you claiming you were above distortion yourself?" The audience shifted in their seats. Cruz didn't answer immediately. He looked down briefly at the note card in front of her. He knew what was written on it. He also knew exactly where this was meant to go. "No one should be above accountability," he said, calm but firm. "Not me, not you, not this network." A few nervous chuckles fluttered through the crowd. Warren raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold accusation. You think this program spreads misinformation?" Cruz met her eyes. "I think every media platform has, at one point or another. What matters is whether you correct it when the facts shift." Joy Behar wasn't having it. She tapped the table. "Let's not act like we're all the same here. We have journalistic standards. We don't push conspiracies." Cruz tilted his head slightly, never losing composure. "And yet, millions of Americans feel misled. Not by conspiracy blogs, but by the outlets they were told to trust." That one landed. It wasn't just the words, it was how he said them. Not with fire, but with focus. Not in anger, but with resolve. Sunny leaned in sharply. "You were involved in investigations many saw as politically driven. Do you regret any of that now?" No, Cruz said without flinching, because truth doesn't care about politics. I followed the facts, even when those facts made people on both sides uncomfortable. Warren leaned back in her chair, her tone sharpening. You do realize how that sounds, right? Like you're casting yourself as some lone truth teller? Cruz didn't miss a beat. I'm not asking for a title, I'm asking for fairness. If we're going to hold public officials accountable, and we should, then we need to be just as critical of the media. They shape perception. That's power. The studio fell into an unusual quiet. People were listening now, not to argue, but to understand. Joy crossed her arms. So what? You want reporters investigated? Punished? No, Cruz replied. I want accountability. When government officials lie, there are hearings, subpoenas, consequences. Why should the media be immune when it holds equal power? A visible chill moved through the studio. Warren frowned. But isn't your version of accountability just a clever way to suppress dissenting voices? Cruz leaned forward slightly, his voice never rising. Only if you think truth is dangerous. The room went still. The sentence didn't echo, it landed. A pause, then scattered applause. Then more. The host looked off stage toward the producers. This wasn't the energy they'd planned for. Whoopi Goldberg, trying to reset the tone, cleared her throat. Let's move on to the FBI. Do you believe the agency has been politicized? Cruz didn't hesitate. Parts of it? Absolutely. And that should concern everyone. Left, right, center. The FBI should serve the Constitution, not a political agenda. That was the pivot, not because it was extreme, but because people started nodding. Not just viewers at home, the audience, even a few faces on set. The mood had changed, and the next words out of Cruz's mouth wouldn't just defend his record. They'd turn the spotlight back on theirs, because until now he'd been absorbing the heat, but now he was about to return it. When a narrative fits your politics, Cruz said, it gets aired. When it doesn't, it gets ignored, or worse, mocked. The silence was loud. You could almost hear the camera crew shift uncomfortably behind the lens. Whoopi folded her arms. That's not true. We've had Republicans on this show before. Cruz nodded without sarcasm. Yes, and how were they treated? A murmur rippled through the audience. Joy Behar didn't wait. You come here acting like you're the victim, but you worked for a president who attacked the press daily, called journalists the enemy of the people. Cruz remained steady. I'm not a victim. I'm just not afraid to say what millions are thinking. That trust in the media is broken, and it didn't break itself. The tension in the room was thick, like someone had struck a match under the table but hadn't lit it yet. Whoopi tried to redirect. Let's go back to the FBI. You said earlier it's been politicized. Are you suggesting there's corruption at the top? I'm not suggesting, Cruz replied. I'm stating. Internal whistleblowers, leaked memos, oversight committee reports, it's public record. Sonny leaned in, sharper now. But aren't you politicizing it by making these claims here? On a political talk show with no hard evidence? I brought evidence, he said, but no one asked for it. What I got were questions about my motives, my alliances, my past, not the facts. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Carefully, deliberately, he unfolded it. This, he said, is a list of retracted headlines, discredited reports, and false stories, aired on national television and never corrected, including here. The table froze. No one spoke. The audience leaned in. Even the lighting seemed to dim. Joy's face tightened. You're doing this for a viral moment, she snapped. No, Cruz said slowly. I'm doing this because I've spent years being called dangerous, dishonest, extreme, and now that I get 5 minutes to respond, I'm told it's for attention. That hit like a gut punch. Even Whoopi leaned back. Cruz placed the paper gently on the table and slid it forward. You don't have to read it now, he said, but I hope you will. And I hope the people watching start asking why so many errors all seem to benefit one political side. And just like that, the energy changed again. A few in the audience clapped, then more. It wasn't thunderous, but it was meaningful. It wasn't noise, it was a signal. The power dynamic had shifted, the hosts felt it. They didn't say it, but their body language did. Suddenly, they weren't steering the conversation. He was. The paper still sat on the table, untouched, but visible. And for the first time all morning, it wasn't the hosts who dictated the next move. It was their guest. Whoopi tried to regain control. "You've made your point," she said, her voice tighter. "But this isn't a courtroom. It's a talk show." Cruz gave a slight smile. "Then let's talk, honestly. No scripts, no positioning, just real questions and real answers." The crowd responded, louder this time. Joy jumped in quickly, hoping to recover the rhythm. "All right, let's be honest then. You work closely with officials who downplayed the press, who attacked journalists, who pushed falsehoods. How do you justify being a part of that?" Cruz didn't blink. "You're talking about politics. I'm talking about trust. There's a difference." Sonny cut in fast. "But you were part of that machine. Are you denying that?" Cruz leaned forward slightly, calm, composed. "I'm saying I served in government. I wasn't spinning narratives. I've spent my life chasing facts, not applause." And he wasn't finished yet. The next line wouldn't just challenge their assumptions, it would question their role entirely. "I worked in government," Cruz said plainly, "not in spin. I've spent my life chasing evidence, not applause." Then it happened, the moment no one expected. He turned toward Warren. "Let me ask you something," he said, his tone still level. The room froze. You could feel it, like the tension had just reset itself, heavier now. The interviewer was about to be the one questioned. Warren hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." "In the last 5 years," Cruz asked, "how many times has this program issued a correction? Not after public outrage, not after social media pressure, but voluntarily, when a host or guest made a claim that turned out to be false." That landed harder than anyone at the table expected. Warren looked off to the producers, but the earpiece stayed silent. No script, no lifeline. Joy tried to cut in. "This isn't about us." Cruz didn't raise his voice. "It is about you. Millions of people watch what's said at this table. You demand accountability from public servants. Why not demand it from yourselves?" The crowd gasped. Then, a moment of pure silence. Not defensive, not combative, just stillness. Because no one had an answer that would sound good. 5 seconds passed, maybe 6. And in television, that's an eternity. Finally, Warren spoke, slower now. "That's a fair question. I don't know the number." Cruz nodded. "That's all I needed to hear." The audience clapped. This time it wasn't polite applause. It was decisive. For the first time, it felt like the show wasn't directing the message. It was responding to it. Sonny scrambled to regain footing. "You're holding us to journalistic standards, but we're commentators. We share opinions." "And opinions are powerful," Cruz replied, "especially when broadcast like facts." It wasn't just what he was saying, it was the way he said it. Measured, calm, unshaken. He wasn't performing, he was exposing, and they hadn't prepared for that. The tension in the studio was no longer just awkward, it was radioactive. And for the viewers at home, it stopped feeling like an ambush of Cruz. It started feeling like a revelation about them. But Cruz wasn't done, because the next thing he said would draw a straight line from the media to the national trust crisis in America. And this time, the host didn't just push back, they got personal. Joy leaned in, her tone sharper now. "Let me ask you something, Ted. Since you're so big on accountability, do you regret anything you've said publicly? Anything you'd take back, if you could?" She wasn't fishing for an answer. She was looking for a crack. He didn't give her one. "I regret how quickly the truth gets buried, he said. "Not the fact that I've tried to dig it up." Warren raised an eyebrow. "That sounds rehearsed." "It sounds honest," Cruz replied, "and that's what makes people uncomfortable." Sonny pressed harder, voice firmer now. "But you've made serious claims about the media, about the FBI, about the government. Doesn't that just fuel the division we're all trying to fix?" Now it wasn't about policy, it was about blame. "What fuels division," Cruz answered, "is when one side gets to question everything and the other is told to sit down and be silent." A murmur moved through the audience. Joy didn't let up. "So you're the victim again?" No, Cruz said without hesitation. I'm the messenger. You can attack me all day long, but that won't change the facts. And again, the crowd responded. Not loud, but real. A shift was happening, and the next round would make it impossible to go back. It was subtle at first, but the audience responded. Applause again, this time more confident. It wasn't scattered anymore. It was deeper. It resonated. Warren leaned in, this time straying from her notes. Let me ask you something, off script. Cruz nodded. Please do. You talk a lot about trust, but you were part of an administration that lied repeatedly, blatantly. How do you separate yourself from that? He didn't flinch. His answer came without hesitation. I serve the Constitution, he said. Not a man, not a party. I followed the evidence wherever it led, even when it took me places no one wanted to go. She waited, hoping he'd stumble, hoping it would sound rehearsed, hollow. It didn't, because in that moment, Cruz wasn't defending a legacy. He was defending an idea that truth doesn't belong to one political side. Sonny took a different route. So where does that leave you now? You're sitting here accusing us of bias, defending your past. What do you want people to walk away with? That you're the hero and we're the villains? He shook his head. No, I want people to walk away thinking. That's it. Think about what they hear, what they're told, and who decides what counts as truth. He paused, not long, just enough for the silence to land. I'm not asking them to believe me. I'm asking them to question everyone, including me. That hit. The audience didn't just clap. This time some stood. Not all, but enough to shift the entire mood. The host looked around. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. And that's when Warren finally said it out loud. You're good. I'll give you that. Cruz smiled. I'm not here to be good. I'm here to be honest. That was the quote, the one that would be clipped, shared, replayed, debated. But the segment wasn't over. Because now the conversation was about to shift into even more dangerous territory, patriotism. And who gets to define it? It began, like all loaded questions do, deceptively simple. Warren leaned in, her voice lower now, deliberate. You've said you stand for the Constitution. You've talked about serving the country. But what does patriotism mean to you? Cruz didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he knew the weight of the moment. He made sure they were listening. To me, he said finally, patriotism means standing up for your country, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when your own side doesn't want to hear it. Joy jumped in. But whose country are you standing up for? Because a lot of people believe what you represent isn't the America they believe in. He looked directly at her. I'm standing up for all of it, he said. Not just red states or blue states, not just one tribe or another. For the whole thing, the messy, flawed, beautiful experiment we're all part of. It was idealistic, but it didn't sound hollow. It sounded earned. Sonny wasn't convinced. But don't you think some of the rhetoric you support has hurt people? Has made others feel excluded from your version of America? I think, Cruz replied, that ignoring truth hurts people a lot more. Now the crowd wasn't reacting. They were listening. Really listening. Joy leaned in sharply. You can't call yourself a patriot and tear down American institutions at the same time. Cruz didn't blink. That's the difference between loyalty and blind faith, he said. I believe in institutions enough to fix them. You believe in them enough to ignore when they're broken. That cracked the room open. Gasps, a ripple of applause. But Cruz wasn't done, not even close. You want to talk about patriotism? Cruz asked, his voice rising just slightly now. Patriotism isn't about waving a flag. It's about standing up and saying, we can do better. Even if it costs you something, especially if it costs you something. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a challenge. Warren leaned forward. So who decides then? Who defines what better even means? The people, Cruz replied without hesitation. Not pundits, not politicians, not the hosts at this table. The people, the ones who wake up early, go to work, pay taxes, and feel like no one's listening to them anymore. And then, like it was scripted, but it wasn't, A woman in the audience stood up. She wasn't planted. She wasn't a staffer. She wore a simple jean jacket. She didn't shout. She didn't protest. She just said clearly, for all to hear, "Finally, someone's saying it." The studio froze. Joy looked stunned. Sonny stayed silent. And for the first time in the segment, Warren said nothing. Because that moment, unscripted and raw, had done something no argument ever could. It proved the point. The conversation wasn't about Ted Cruz anymore. It was about them, the people who felt silenced for far too long. And Cruz, he'd just cracked that silence wide open. But it wasn't over, because now the topic wasn't just politics or patriotism, Rome. It was power. And who's really holding it? No applause followed, no laughter, just a stillness so sharp it demanded attention. Joy spoke again, but her voice didn't carry the usual bite. "So what are you saying, Ted? That we're part of the problem now?" Cruz didn't blink. "I'm saying power doesn't always come from elected office," he said. "Sometimes it comes from the ones holding the microphone." The audience shifted in their seats. Sonny crossed her arms. "We're not lawmakers," she said flatly. "We don't write legislation." "No," Cruz agreed, "but you write perception, and sometimes that's even more powerful." Warren shook her head. "So now we're responsible for how people feel?" "No," he said calmly. "You're responsible for what you say, just like I am." He leaned forward slightly. "The difference, when I mess up, there's an investigation. When the media messes up, there's a new segment the next day and it moves on." The audience was leaning in again, quiet, focused. Joy tried to regain footing. "Let's be real, Ted. You've shaped perception too. You've been part of this system. Don't act like you're some outsider." "I'm not pretending anything," Cruz said. "I've seen how it works from the inside and how it gets abused from both sides." Sonny didn't let go. "Then why even come here? You knew how this would go." He nodded. "I came here because people deserve to hear something that wasn't cleared by a PR team." He gestured around the studio. "Because this room, this platform, is where a lot of Americans decide how they feel about issues, about leaders, about truth." And then he flipped it again. "But let me ask you something." The room stopped. Everyone froze, again. Warren gave a faint nod. "Go on." "You've asked about my loyalties, my past, my mistakes. So now I'll ask, what's your responsibility to the public? When you know something is wrong but it fits the narrative, do you say it anyway? Or do you stay silent?" The question didn't come with anger. It came with weight, and that made it heavier than any accusation. Joy tried to respond. Nothing came. Sonny glanced at Warren. Warren looked at the crowd, and for a split second, it was obvious they didn't have a clean answer, because it wasn't a yes or no question. It was the question, the one every powerful voice eventually has to face: who controls the story, and who pays when it's wrong? Cruz didn't press. He let the silence hang in the air like a verdict. "I'm not saying you're bad people," he added quietly. "I'm saying you have power, and power without reflection becomes control." That line hit. Even the camera operators slowed their movements, sensing something had shifted in real time. No one expected this. Not from this guest, not on this show, but it was happening, live, unedited, unstoppable. And even if the host wouldn't say it, the audience felt it. The story wasn't going how they'd planned, because it wasn't their story anymore. It was his. But there was still one last minefield to walk through. One topic no one at that table wanted to say out loud: the politics behind the media. Once that door opened, there'd be no closing it. Joy tried to ease into it, cautious. "Okay, since we're talking about power and perception, let's talk about political narratives. You've made claims about media bias. Do you think this show has a political agenda?" Cruz didn't flinch. "Yes." One word: a hammer. Joy blinked. "Just like that?" "Yes," he repeated. "Just like that." Sonny jumped in indignant. "So just because we have progressive values, you think we're biased?" He shook his head. "I think bias is when facts get filtered through ideology, and I think that happens here, a lot." Warren leaned forward now, clearly agitated. "We call out what we see, And what we've seen these last few years is dangerous rhetoric, conspiracies, attacks on democracy. We're not going to pretend both sides are the same, because they're not. I'm not asking you to pretend, Cruz said. I'm asking you to apply the same standard. If you're going to scrutinize one side for disinformation, you have to be willing to call it out when your own side does it too. There it was, the line they never wanted spoken, said calmly on national television. Joy fired back. Give us an example. He was ready. The Hunter Biden laptop story, he said. You dismissed it as Russian disinformation. You labeled it a hoax. Social media platforms banned it. And this show, like many others, never corrected the record once the truth came out. That cracked something open. Not applause, tension, because people remembered. Sonny countered quickly. That story was unverified at the time. No, Cruz said. It was inconvenient at the time, and that's the problem. Facts shouldn't depend on timing. Warren narrowed her eyes. So you're saying we suppressed it? I'm saying the media environment punished anyone who questioned the approved version of events. And when the truth changed, no one was held accountable. Joy raised her voice slightly. So what, you want us to issue an apology right now? He shook his head. No, I want transparency. I want audiences to hear both sides, to be trusted with the facts, and to decide for themselves. Then he paused. Just a moment, but it landed like a bell ringing. That's not left or right. That's freedom. And the crowd erupted. Not polite applause, not manufactured cheers, real reaction. Warren leaned back, arms crossed, not angry, recalculating. Because she knew exactly what just happened. The audience hadn't connected to them. They had connected to him. Cruz continued, his voice quieter now, almost solemn. When the media acts like a filter instead of a mirror, it stops being journalism. It becomes influence. Another ripple, subtle but deep. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about trust. And in living rooms across America, viewers weren't just watching a confrontation. They were asking themselves a question the host couldn't control. Have I only been hearing what someone else wanted me to believe? The air was tight. The show was still live. But the conversation, it had crossed into dangerous territory, because after this, there would be no clean wrap-up, only a reckoning. And a few minutes later, Senator Ted Cruz would say something that wouldn't just shake the studio. It would follow the host long after the camera stopped rolling. It was Warren who broke the silence. But her voice was different now, less combative. Measured. You've made your point, she said. You've said the media is broken, that this show is biased, that people should question what they hear. So what now? What's your solution? Cruz looked across the table, calm, clear. My solution, he said, is conversation. Not monologues, not echo chambers. Real, uncomfortable, face-to-face dialogue like this. He let that sit. I don't hate the press. I don't fear it. I just want us to do better. Sonny leaned in. That sounds nice, but let's be honest. Most of what you've said today will be clipped, edited, twisted. Cruz nodded. Probably, but people aren't stupid. They know when they were being manipulated, and they're tired of it. Then he looked directly into the camera. I'm not here to change anyone's mind. I'm here to remind them they're allowed to have one. That was it. The line, the one that would flood social media in hours. The one the producers would replay and highlight reels, even if they didn't want to. I'm here to remind them they're allowed to have one. The studio was silent. Even the hosts had nothing to say. Joy looked down at her notes and quietly slid them aside. Sonny leaned back. Warren glanced off stage, her expression unreadable. They could all feel it now, the shift, the loss of control, but Cruz wasn't done. You asked earlier if I regret anything, he said. I don't regret defending what I believe in, even when it costs me. He paused, then delivered the last blow. What I do regret is how many people in this country feel like they can't speak freely without being labeled, canceled, or dismissed. That's not democracy, that's control, dressed up as conversation. The crowd erupted again, louder than before. This wasn't just a studio audience anymore. It was a room full of people watching a mask fall off. Lippo. Joy tried once more. But don't you think platforms like this try to give space for open dialogue? Cruz looked at her gently. I think you give space to people who already agree with you. I think real disagreement makes shows like this uncomfortable. Until today. That landed, not with a thud, but with a truth no one wanted to admit. Warren sighed. So what now? We just agree to disagree? Cruz gave a faint smile. No, we listen, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The show was winding down. The segment was nearly over. But the tension? It stayed. Because the damage, or the revelation, depending on who you asked, was already done. The outro music began. The wide camera pulled back. The audience clapped. But it wasn't the same applause as before. It wasn't robotic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was thoughtful. Lingering. The kind that happens when people hear something they didn't expect and need a second to process it. The host stood first, quiet, distant, avoiding each other's eyes. Cruz didn't rush. He sat for a second longer, steady because he knew he'd done what he came to do. When he finally stood, he didn't look at the hosts. He looked toward the audience and nodded. A small gesture, but one that resonated. Then it happened. A crew member, not mic'd, not in the shot, walked up to a producer and whispered something. The producer's eyes went wide. They scanned the crowd, not looking at the hosts, watching the audience, because something rare was unfolding. Audience members, unprompted, began stepping down toward the stage. Not to protest, not to challenge, but to shake his hand, to whisper something quietly, face to face, as the cameras dimmed. Joy saw it first. She stood still, frozen, watching as 3, 5, a dozen people lined up to speak with the man they had been told not to trust. Warren glanced over her shoulder. Sunny stayed silent, arms folded, but her eyes followed them too. A woman from the front row touched Cruz's arm and whispered, I don't agree with everything, but thank you for saying what nobody else will. He nodded, no cameras, no sound bites, just a moment of recognition. Backstage, a floor manager asked a producer, should we cut the behind-the-scenes feed? The answer came quick, no, keep it rolling. Because this wasn't just about a guest anymore. It was about a crack, a shift, something real. One assistant producer finally stepped forward and said, you got people talking. That's rare here. Cruz smiled. That's the point. Moments later, the host reappeared backstage. Warren walked past without a word. Sunny gave a nod, brief, polite. Joy looked, not angry, just tired. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. This wasn't a typical segment. This was going to echo, because it wasn't about scoring points. It was about reclaiming space, for questions, for doubt, for the audience's right to hear more than one voice. By the time Ted Cruz left the building, hashtags were trending, clips were circulating, but the most powerful moment, it never aired. It didn't have to, because the truth had already done its job. It challenged, it unsettled, and it stayed. So the next time the lights go up on that stage and a new guest walks out, the audience will remember the day it didn't go according to script. And they'll wonder, what if the next one doesn't play along either? And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what they're hoping for.